would I have gained in being kind of transparent or discreet? Of course, I have moments of doubts. Of course, I have those moments where I feel that I'm not enough. But I also realize that if I'm so visible and so vocal about it, it's also because we need it.
She Owns the Stage, the podcast inspiring women to own their voices and speak with impact.
My name is Anna Gumbau, and I am a former journalist turned an event moderator, communications consultant, and public speaking trainer. I run the She Owns the Stage one-on-one public speaking training for women. And this podcast is all about that. It's about women on stage, women who shape the narrative, women who lead the way, and how these women leaders have found their voices. And in the first episode, I couldn't have had anyone better to join me here on the stage because she's someone very dear to me, someone that I really admire, someone that I consider a little bit like my own advisory board. Oh. And it's a pleasure to have you in the podcast because I couldn't have thought about anyone else to join me in this first episode. I'm talking about Cornelis, the founder and the executive director of Next Energy Consumer. Hello, Marine.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me on board. And really thank you so much for the kind words.
It's great to have you here. Welcome to Burning Questions. I just gave a tiny bit of a glimpse on who you are. You are an expert on consumer rights, for the energy transition and energy justice. But I think it would be great for the audience that you could introduce yourself. So who is Marine Cornelis?
I'm many hats at the same time, but most people know me for what I do. And so I've been running Next Energy Consumer, which is a policy consultancy for about 7 years. And it's really specialized on the social dimension of the energy and climate transition. Mm-hmm. So from energy consumer rights to energy poverty. For instance, I just wrote a report for the European Commission on summer challenges, really in the framework of energy poverty, but also the kind of human dimension of the digitalization of the energy transition. So really, my work is about putting the people back at the center of the energy conversation, energy policy conversation, because I'm not so much of a doer, I'm more of a thinker, and really that has been my job over the many years now. And I have this knack for uncomfortable conversations where I actually like to ask those questions and to make sure that people can grow, because it's out of our comfort zone somehow that we grow. So 4 years ago, I also launched a podcast called Energy Ethic, that is really about the people who make the energy transition happen, and we can actually learn from them, learn from their experience into trying to make the world a better place. Really one commitment at the time, right?
Mm-hmm. And you've had really some stellar guests on Next Energy Consumer. You've brought so many dimensions and so many human faces to the energy transition.
You've been one of my guests, right?
I've been a guest of yours twice.
Yes,
As
twice.
a matter of fact, one about 3 years ago, and then a more recent one on communicating the energy transition in times of competitiveness. Yeah. There's a question that I wanted to, one of my burning questions I wanted to ask you, which is, you just said that you are more of a thinker than a doer.
Yeah.
But actually, I see you really as a doer, as someone who is really an entrepreneur in the energy transition. I'd be very curious to hear from you how Next Energy Consumer was born. What made you also go independent, go solo? What can you tell me about that?
So it's a series of circumstances, right? So I studied political sciences, as many people in Brussels, and many people who are now elected, even at the European Parliament. So anyway, I had this kind of passion for Europe to start with, and then I discovered the energy sector, and I remember very vividly in one of my first jobs being called Greenpeace Infiltrate, because it was back in 2010, and I was asking this energy company trainer where the renewables were in the kind of business model of this company. And somebody told me, yeah, but you're the Greenpeace infiltrate. Whereas actually I was perhaps just a millennial who was kind of aware of the changes at stake. And you can see that 15 years later, it seems that I was right, because many businesses have disrupted from their classical oil and gas to really a more 360-degree portfolio in the sector. And then I moved back to Brussels and started working for the Belgian Energy Ombudsman, who is a body in charge of handling the complaints between the end users, really like you and me, or like this podcast studio, and their energy supplier. And step by step, I became like the voice of Energy Ombudsman in Europe. I became the Secretary General of the organization. So I had quite an interesting, visibility, an interesting network to start with. And I also found my why, which came during a completely random meeting I was attending. So at the very beginning of my work with the Energy Ombudsman and with NEON, this network of Energy Ombudsman, I was working part-time, handling the complaints on the one hand, and on the other hand, negotiating at EU level for consumer rights to be a little bit more prominent in the conversation, right? And I remember being around this table, expert table, and somebody, I can't remember from which institution, said, "Oh, that's wonderful. With the smart meter, I can monitor the consumption of my home in, I don't know, Finland or Norway. I can't remember." But anyway, and I was like, is it really what smart meters and those kind of technologies are for? Is it something like for an elite, a number of people who actually have a second house and just need to monitor the consumption, or is it something they can actually that could make a difference at the end of the day? So, those kind of two very revealing moments where I realized that there was a missing point in the narrative, a missing point in the conversation, which was the people's role in making the sustainable energy transition happen. Years later, when I moved to Turin in Italy for personal reasons, I thought, okay, what do I want to do? Because I have this I'm quite young, but I still have this kind of very unique perspective, like interest in the world, etc. Where would I be more useful? And then I was approached immediately by a UK research project on access to justice, energy poverty. So really those kind of dimensions, but it was a research project. So it was my very first time into research, working with academia, etc. But it was very defining because it allowed me to see the other dimension of policy making, which was like the kind of evidence you construct. And then I realized that there was actually such a gap between evidence that was collected by scientists, by research centers, even some think tanks, and policymakers, what they were expecting. So I started also building really this kind of unique and original path into making sure the kind of two worlds were actually conversing. And then I was also approached, and I'm still more approached by businesses who try to grasp what the policymakers want, where the research is on those very dimensions that I just mentioned, which are the social dimension of the energy and climate transition. So I've worked not only in Europe, but I've worked also in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Africa as well. And, I find it so fascinating because we are at turbulent times where some people would like to kind of overlook again those topics, but I think it's really time to say, okay, it's time to double up on those kind of issues, on those kind of also solutions that exist, right?
And I think it's fascinating because indeed, you've worked with businesses, and I know that you've worked extensively with EU institutions, Commission, European Economic and Social Committee, to mention a few, and you've produced some really high quality reports on the subjects around energy transition and energy justice. And I think I found it really interesting because normally, as a consultant and as someone providing advice, normally the institutions and businesses also would go to, big consultancies, well-established consultancies, think tanks even, And you've made a voice really and a name for yourself. So is there a market for independent policy and research consultants in Brussels, in the EU in general, globally? How was it like for you?
I think there is. I mean, I also partner with bigger organizations from time to time. It's also something that happens. But I think overall, what is needed is disruption. And disruption also, or maybe mostly, comes from people who have this kind of independent mindset that actually I have built also, that I built through my business being a solopreneur. So, it's also because of that I think my services are kind of appreciated, because I come from a place where I actually don't want to form a consensus around my ideas, but more like, okay, if you know my ideas, and that's why you will want to work with me, right? So it's the kind of maybe an opposite direction, perhaps counterintuitive in a way, but you are actually, when you work with me, you are actually guaranteed that it will not be any kind of greenwashing or social washing, or generally speaking, it won't be bullshit.
And you've really found your own voice in this space. Like people recognize you. People find a very unique sense to what you do, and that you bring something very unique to the table. It doesn't happen very often in these worlds where people tend to stick to their own policy position and use the same dry wording. I'm wondering what it was for you, this journey of finding your voice in such a crowded space. I mean, you already told me, or gave us a little bit of a hint, that you were quite the disruptor already from the very beginning. No, the Greenpeace infiltrated in the energy company. What can you tell me about this journey of yourself as a public speaker, as a public person as well, because you have a lot of followers on LinkedIn. I don't know how many subscribers you have at Energetic. So was it difficult? Was there something holding you back at any point when it came to finding your own voice and getting your work out there?
Yeah, but let me put it differently. What would I have gained in being kind of transparent or discreet? So in a sense, I had to learn that I had to take the space. And of course, I have moments of doubts. Of course, I have those moments where I feel that I'm not enough, where I could do things better, where I could, scale up my business or things like that. Of course, I do have those moments, but I also realize that if I'm so visible and so vocal about it, it's also because we need it. We actually need it. And, Rosa Parks said something about fighting for the good fight, because it's actually the good thing that we need to do. And I really believe that we need to have those kind of the conversations that I bring forward about those kind of human and social dimension of the energy transition. And that overall, by talking in too many technical terms, we are losing too many people. Yeah, when I say that, perhaps somebody will, put me a kind of populist label, if you want, right? But I don't think it's the right term or the right approach, right? Because for me, it's more like, okay, how do we make sustainability? How do we make the green transition more than a project, but really our DNA? As European societies and as global societies overall, because it's here to stay. But if we keep on, clashing over, if we keep on letting, let's say, right-wing politicians, really MAGA kind of people have the control over this narrative, we are losing something. So we need to embrace a narrative that is way more positive, that is way more centered around the people's need, around the people's actually understanding of the situation. And how do we make sure that happens? It's through empathy, it's through active listening, it's through bringing really people on board with their heart, with their flaws. And that's also something that I try to bring forward with my podcast, Energetic. I always ask about their people's own journey, because I think it's because we learn about their flaws and their imperfections that we can actually trust them. We can actually trust their projects. We can actually trust their visions, and we can actually trust what they stand for.
I love this because now I'm thinking about, all the women around me and all the women leaders that inspire me. And I think that's precisely what they do, leading with empathy, leading with, being outspoken, but embracing this positive narrative, isn't it? And it's still so missing, at least when in energy conversations, in the energy sector. I'm very curious to hear from you, since your focus has been the human dimension of the energy transition, the consumer dimension, and especially with, indeed, right-wing and especially far-right politicians and movements and parties gaining ground, narratives discrediting the importance of justice, of diversity, equity, inclusion. How do you think then the communication about the energy transition is leading towards? To which extent there's room for the human dimension, for the social dimension of the energy transition? It seems that we are now focusing heavily on competitiveness, even maybe just on security and defense is going to be taking over sooner rather than later. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, so I thought about it, when you asked me, when you sent me the topic of the conversation. And, I think we are kind of at a crossroad where we can actually be either get backtrack on, getting back into this kind of madman approach to communications. You remember the series Mad Men with John Hamm? That was quite fun, but that was a very very, let's say, conservative vision on the world, in a sense, and really how things are looking forward. And I see that so many sectors outside the energy sector are embracing the kind of vitality from new generations, the kind of imperfection that comes from the TikTok videos or things like that. That why should the energy sector keep on doing really boring things, right? So how can we make sure that actually we can keep on disrupting things while maybe not mentioning disruption? How can we have this kind of profound, sustainable approach without looking too radical, right? Because the radicalism that maybe you and I bring for certain people, maybe that's scary. So how can we kind of be a little bit more reassuring, right? So I think we are at such a crossroad. The energy transition is here to stay. The green, let's say, the renewable energy is the different way of living our cities is here to stay, etc. And it will grow in the future, but how can we actually embrace the narrative in a way that is a little bit, more consensual somehow, more positive, more around, being close to the needs of the people and not close to, and what do people want? Well, they want security, they want food on their table, they want a job, they want money. So that's pretty clear. And let me share with you an example, something that I looked into quite recently. So I was invited a few weeks ago to speak about the Baltic disconnection. So you may have heard about that. So basically, the three Baltic countries, Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, they disconnected from the Russian grids over a weekend. It was like a project that was planned for many, many years. But that was something like a very large energy infrastructure, a project that was set up and happened very smoothly. So we heard about it for only a couple of days and then it disappeared from regular medias, right? But my take on this is that there wasn't any kind of counter argument against it or counter conversations against it, because there was a very profound, let's say, from the people and from the governments and from the organizations, including the society, there was a profound desire to make a positive narrative around it. And that was really this kind of consensual approach over this kind of energy trilemma that we all know about, like security of supply, safety, affordability, etc. So they managed to put that together. So, that didn't create any kind of friction. And I think it's exactly the kind of positive conversations we also need to bring forward, right? There was trust. There was trust in the project.
Yeah, there was trust, and I think there was the knowledge that energy security is national security for these countries, which maybe if I would be thinking about the case of Spain, where I'm from, we wouldn't see, the threat of Russia and the enemy at the doorstep so closely, right? But then it was actually Russia that was using disinformation tactics to say that the disconnection from the Russian grid will bring energy prices up so much. So yeah, I think this is an example where we see disinformation around the energy transition happening. I'm curious to hear from you then, what do you think are the way forward? What do you think are perhaps like the trends and that we're going to be seeing when it comes to communicating the energy transition? And to which extent do you think the narrative is still going to change? If there's still a strong consumer citizens dimension into it? What can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so there is still a big desire to address the root cause of climate change. In your communication, nobody should chicken out of using climate change, because it's something that exists, that we see in our daily lives. But what is kind of, we need to be extremely cautious with framing sustainability only as a nice to have. And I think that's also one of the kind of lessons we have to take from the past weeks, between the mega erratic behavior and the kind of competitiveness agenda and kind of omnibus conversations, right? Is that now sustainability has to be the backbone, but maybe we need to be a little bit less vocal about it, because it's now time to get shit down. So maybe it's no more a big selling point, but maybe it's more something that we expect to have in our products, as we expected our products to be safe in the first place. Now we may expect them to be sustainable in the first place, right? So it's a very interesting narrative shift. Of course, there are many different forces at stake. We don't see the kind of full picture of, investment challenges, omnibus, is it deregulation, is it just simplification? We don't see that yet. But overall, what we see is still a need for kind of getting back to the basis, which is having access to a job, having access to food, having access to leisure activities as well. So it's this kind of very profound, very simple, evident basis of our conversations. But we also have to acknowledge that a lot of people feel that this kind of sustainable products or sustainable branding is not accessible for them, and we need to make sure that it's actually not the case. That they are part also of the conversations, right?
I think so, and of course, I see that there's still a strong demand for sustainable products, and that it's still very much ingrained in people's minds that they want products that are sustainable and they do not do damage to the planet. Of course, then the pricing point needs to reflect that, and we need to make sure that indeed these products become the norm. I always say that when it comes to communicating sustainability, saying that you are committed to sustainability and saying that you're committed to the Paris Agreement is not enough.
Yeah.
Like the S word doesn't cut it anymore. I think we are at the time that we need to show the impact that by committing to sustainability, we did this, and that, and we reduced our emissions, our footprint, our waste by this, and this much. I think it's not enough at some point. I mean, I usually say that if you have to say all over again that you're sustainable,
Yeah. There's something fishy. Yeah.
maybe you're not so much so.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, there is overall a consensus against pollution. Nobody likes being a polluter. Nobody. Like, it's like everybody wants to be part of this kind of positive conversation. I mean, except if you're a total mad person, but everybody wants to address pollution in their community, pollution that is, they don't want the schoolyard to be polluted. They don't want, to be the cause for people to be sick. Nobody wants that, right? So, but there has been so much blah blah that we really need to get into the practical terms, right? It has to be profound and the norm, and it has to be, as you said, it has to be accessible, it has to be cheap, it has to be like the go-to solution, but it doesn't have to be, or it shouldn't be the selling point anymore.
Mm-hmm. I think so. Yeah, it's kind of things that at some point we have to take for granted. And that personally, I was expecting that all the EU legislation we had agreed, blah, 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 of the past 5 years would lead us into that. Whether it's leading to it or not, we still need to see. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a question of pace, I would say. And the biggest mistake we could make, I think, would be to just use too much energy in believing it's a sprint, because it's not a sprint, And when you run a sprint, you go very fast, but you don't go very far, right? But actually, it's more like a marathon, or even a ultra marathon, or even like a marathon des sables. So it's a very, very long journey. So we shouldn't lose our why. We shouldn't lose our scope. We shouldn't lose our pace, because we are here for the long run. And I think it would be a mistake to go too fast.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. I think we also, even in a more personal level, those of us who work on the energy transition to make it happen, I think especially the past 5 years, Green Deal, like all these.
Yeah, it was hectic.
Yeah, it was really tough for many of us. And at the end of the day, I just thought that, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. We need to also save our energies for the long run, and be sure that also people can keep up with us. People can keep up in this race, right? I think it's a very good metaphor at the end of the day, which leads me maybe to a final topic that I wanted to tackle with you, which is the question of the women who are joining the race and the women who are maybe leading the race. You've been in the energy sector for some years now. You're one of these like women leading the voices and the narrative in the energy transition here in Europe. How do you see the role and the number of women like working in these topics and on energy transition, a world that has been so much male dominated for so many years, and up until very recently it was so normal to see all male panels on energy topics, and it still happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I don't like to be the pink quota or the social justice quota in the panel, but sometimes it happens. And recently somebody also told me that maybe it was a question of Mars versus Venus vision of the world, which I found extremely, I don't know if it was more stupid or more rude.
Can you elaborate on this? What do you think they meant?
Yeah, no, I think, because, the work I do comes from a place of research, we actually need to put human beings at the center, and, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's not like, it's not painting that you put on the wall. It's actually because our society is diverse that we need we need our businesses to be diverse as well, to appeal to more people, to appeal to more workers, etc. So it's not, it should be a no-brainer in a way. Okay. So anyway, I come out of this conversation, and somebody with a technical background asked me some questions, and then the third person who wasn't involved in the conversation but had just overheard what we were saying said, "Oh, but perhaps it's just a Mars versus Venus conversation." It's like, because I have like a background in more political sciences and the other one from engineering, it's Mars versus Venus, and also because he happens to be a man and I happen to be a woman. So it would be such a bad shortcut, right?
I cannot believe we're still here yet.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like, no, would it be more powerful if a man was saying what I was just saying? I don't know. But in a sense, it also feels that some people are still not finding women credible enough still, They will kind of respect you 80%, whereas they should respect you at the same level as men. So, I find it, I was very disappointed with this kind of behavior. But that's also why I think we need to keep on having conversations. We keep on putting women to the table, and on International Women's Day, I try to also say, okay, there are some women I love, I admire, I am genuinely in awe with, and you are part of them. And what I really admire about these women is that it's not only about finding your seat at the table, but being sure that you bring other chairs for other people. And maybe you bring also another table, because if the conversation doesn't happen on the one hand, maybe you need it to happen somewhere else. So I think it's also about really having to be a little bit more sincere in our commitments. If you see as a woman or as a person who feel underrepresented for many valid reasons, it's also about you showing up. And if you realize that there is nobody who is actually representing you, be this voice.
But you still hear sometimes all these excuses about, we don't look for gender quotas, or we don't see gender, we only see expertise, and we want to bring the best to the table. What would you tell these people?
Yeah, some people will say we don't see color, we don't see religion, we don't see place from where we don't see ability or disability. Yeah. But try to see the world try to get in their food. Try to get the world from their perspective. Is it really this way? So, it's very... I think if we go immediately into clash with the kind of people who will just have this kind of statement, they won't learn about it. So you need to ask them, why would you believe that? I'm trying to I won't say I'm trying to educate you, because I pass for, know-it-all woman, the kind of, we tend to get this kind of very harsh comments over ourselves as women. Like, they can be harsher than on men. So, So it's like, ask the question, and if somebody feels uncomfortable by the questions or by the answers they are trying to provide, maybe you're touching a very sensible point.
True. I realized also with people that I discuss with that perhaps are miles away from my values, I realized that it's no use to clash with them. First of all, I mean, it's not, it's not worth my time to clash with someone who doesn't want to listen. Someone who is willing to listen, sometimes just realize that it's worth being a bit more pedagogical with them and try to understand their point of view and say, but haven't you thought about it this way or this other way? And like, even within close circles of mine or even within my family, I realized that maybe they were not very conscious about certain things, be it the energy transition itself or the role of women in it, or the need for gender equality policies, etc. And I realized that makes a whole difference. Is that an approach that you would take, or what's usually your approach when it comes to having the uncomfortable conversations? Because that's something you mentioned at the beginning. You like the uncomfortable questions or the uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, so I think it's really important, and I mean, to first take the time to kind of listen to their viewpoint, because maybe their values are also kind of okay, and there are more points where we can meet than actually the ones where we can actually clash. So, I think it's also very important not to enter in this kind of cancel conversation, right? Which would be very, very dangerous. So that would say that's my first point. And then try to educate our, like, one question by one question this kind of knowledge, question this viewpoint, I think we have a lot of material that can actually support what we are sharing, whether it is like movies, whether they are news article, radio spots, or maybe also some kind of positions that I take. Interestingly, I can talk about that because I think you would be happy to hear about that. So my dad has been involved in this kind of save the forest conversations for absolutely valid point, right? Not to destroy the forest, to build new buildings and, overbuild and so on. But then sometimes the organization he associates with is against building more solar power plants by destroying the forest. So, instead of saying, okay, in both senses, actually we need more power and we need to be built somewhere, so maybe we can get rid of a portion of forest, and, which would be a position some people adopt. Instead, I try to say, okay, so, maybe there are some areas where that could be worth putting some solar panels. So, I try to kind of feed the conversation going through if the door closed, I go by the window, right? So it's a little bit like that. But at the end of the day, some people, you also have to acknowledge that some people are more willing to dip into the uncomfortable conversation than others. And so if you question the kind of beliefs of someone, it can be tough. Maybe they won't accept it in the first place. So it's more like trying to infuse the conversation with something that some points where we will actually make a proper steps forward together.
Mm-hmm. And I think in the current context, also with the backlash against diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, it seems that we were on the right track in terms of having these uncomfortable conversations. I'm a bit afraid that we might be backtracking. Are you hopeful that we can still have better conversations at the end of the day?
Maybe we can have better conversations because the masks are falling, in a sense.
I see.
Yeah. So maybe we can have actually conversations with a part of the political landscape that has not been included in those conversations. The fact that that this part of the political landscape has not been included makes also that they have not had the chance to educate themselves on those topics. So maybe again, I'm playing a little bit the devil's advocate on this, but maybe if we manage to have those people on board and ask themselves the tough questions, maybe we can get into places where we can actually grow a little. And, in the sustainability, green growth, renewable energy, etc., it's a question of urban security. It's a question of competitiveness. It's a question of wealth. It's a question of people's well-being, etc. So is it actually something, as a politician, you can stand against? Mm-hmm. Can you stand against the well-being of your constituent? Once you understand that, is there a way, again, If you are completely fallacious, maybe not. But is there a way you can actually oppose to that?
Wow, so many questions to reflect on. Marine, I have a few, talking about tough questions, I have a few rapid, quick fire questions for you to wrap up this episode. I think we'll finish this conversation in a high.
Yeah.
So let's leave it like that. It will hopefully also spark some questions for our upcoming guests. The first one is, if you could describe Marine Cornelis and Marine Cornelis' voice in 3 adjectives, what would they be?
Oh, that's a tough one. So it depends on the language I speak. Green with a touch of pink. Yeah, because I associate sounds with colors. So let's start with that first. Then I would say committed, because I truly believe in what I do and, my kind of goal or mission. And the third one would be positive.
So a touch of pink, committed, and positive.
Yeah.
I love it. Do you have any sort of ritual or anything that you do before you go on stage, before you do any of your public speaking assignments to feel a little less nervous?
Yeah, I always think of my daughter who believes that my job is about curing giraffes. So, it puts a lot of things into perspective, right? Because, mommy doesn't cure giraffe brains, but she's convinced that I do that, and it's extremely important, right? So it's important to live to her expectations, right? I want her to grow up maybe not believing that I cure giraffes. I will have to break the spell someday, but really seeing that the sky is the limit.
Maybe there's a bit of a butterfly effect here, that by influencing the people you influence, they influence other people and they get to change things in a way that they end up curing and healing and helping giraffes.
Yeah, perhaps. So if you listen to this and you cure giraffes, I'm your ambassador.
So who is a public speaker, woman or not necessarily, that inspires you?
There are many women that I really like, but I will mention one that I think more people should read or listen to. Her name is Rachel Botsman, and she's an expert in trust. And I've been feeling really inspired by her work on trust, on her definition of trust. She defines it as a confident relationship with the unknown. And I think it's beautiful because in a way it really shows that we can make a big difference when we actually decide to jump into something. And again, that we have those kind of uncomfortable situations, but first and foremost, we accept to have uncomfortable conversations that will kind of shake our beliefs.
I love it. I will have to look her up. A book that has inspired you a lot lately?
A book that has inspired me, Shantaram. It was a book written about 15 years ago about a guy who had a crazy life living in slums in India. And, I felt completely transported into different worlds in different time where there was no internet. I don't know how people were doing it. With different values also, because he revolves around some kind of Indian mafias as well. So something really like, I felt sometimes really kind of, it took me out of my daily life and concerns, and that was really nice.
Shantaram.
Yeah.
Okay. A podcast that inspires you.
My podcast, energetic. No,
I can relate to that.
I really, really like the Europeans. And I really like, kudos to the Europeans. We love you guys. And I really like Zero by Afshak Rati, which is a podcast. So Afshak Rati is a Bloomberg journalist, and he's been having really, really interesting conversations. And I also like the one called Columbia Energy Exchange that gives a very interesting perspective from the other side of the pond.
What would you tell your younger self?
Go for it.
What would you tell your older self? What is something that you wouldn't want your older self in 20, 30 years' time to never forget?
Yeah, I would like my older self to say, yeah, you were right to go into that route, which was not easy, which was not paved for you, but you made it happen, and many other people are following, and that's good. That would be nice.
Marine, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you in this first episode. As I said,
you
I
so
couldn't
much.
have imagined anyone else to be sitting next to me in this conversation. How are you feeling about it?
Thank you so much. Well, recently our common friend Sophie, hi Sophie, asked, also said that I should be on more podcasts. So I think she will be also delighted to hear my viewpoints on things. So thank you so much for giving me this space. I mean, yeah, I really like to hear other people talk, but yeah.
And where can people find you?
On LinkedIn, I'm a little bit hyperactive on LinkedIn. On Energetic Podcast, I also have a website, nextenergyconsumer.eu. I'm also on Blue Sky, but I'm not that good on Blue Sky. And other social media, well, not so much.
Well, excellent. So you know where to find Marine. Thank you so much for what's been a really great conversation. There's so much that we could have discussed in terms of your own personal journey as a solopreneur, your insights into climate communications and communications around social justice, the need to have more uncomfortable conversations, the role of women leading the energy transition. So thank you so much for answering my burning questions, because this is a lot of the questions that I wanted to also ask you at some point on a more personal setup. And see you all in the next episode. Thank you so much for connecting here, for joining us. Thank you to the podcast studio for such an amazing studio and setup for us to record this episode. And until the next time.
Thank you, Anna.